general, it's very important to check everything that you believe.
Some of the newer practitioners,
so much misinformation out there.
It's healthy to question your ideology.
Take people's unverified personal gnosis.
All these different bad habits like
reasonings with ourselves and going over rationality.
Thinking everyone's against you, thinking everyone else is wrong.
Escapism.
Attacking others because they don't agree with you.
Where they don't want to deal with like any negativity or any criticism.
The right hand and the left hand path.
And it feels like a personal attack against you.
Any sort of darkness or badness in their life.
Where the dichotomy begins.
It's important to open yourself.
Is it really valuable or meaningful?
My name is AIDEN.
GEORGINA.
Chandler.
Welcome to Occultism with a Side of Salt.
Today we're going to be talking about angels, the history of them, where they come from, and how they've been interpreted today in the modern era. There's been a massive evolution that we've seen in how angels are interpreted, especially since they come from a more Abrahamic background and are now being more accepted by pagan backgrounds.
I think the evolution from the Old Testament angels, where it's the fire in the eyes and the swirling and all that, to the modern artistic conception of angels has kind of become something that people use as a sort of way to kind of show that they are esoteric, or kind of like, it's a common, to be quite blunt, it's really kind of a common meme to go over this and to talk about this stuff, but we kind of wanted to dive into it deeper. I think angels are something that everyone is familiar with, but at the same time not. The angel has kind of been taken in a lot of different contexts and has been a lot less solid than we think it is. Like, yeah, we all know the men with wings, but I feel like most people don't know where they come from or what angels actually are, because we see them as these kind of like loving figures, where if you read the actual scripture in the Torah and the Bible, they're not exactly loving or like the type of people who would just hold you tight and cuddle you. They're kind of terrifying, like the famous line, "Be not afraid." There's a reason why they had to say, "Be not afraid," you know what I mean?
I think that line is nearly comedic, to be quite honest. I was doing a little bit of background search, and I came across a few scriptures that described angels as lacking the understanding of physicality and therefore not presenting as physical, and being almost like what we would call the embodiment of an energy, almost. Previously, it seems like the first real appearance of men with wings is, I believe they're archangels. Michael and Gabriel are mentioned in Abrahamic texts. Before that, and I'm sure you guys have seen a resurrection of this in modern art, that there were certain attributes given to angels, such as being many-eyed or flaming, or even wheels. There was a article that I read, kind of going over the interpretation of what an angel is and the hierarchy of angels, almost, that related to Kabbalah and what type of angel rules over what, but the four visions of Ezekiel. That in of itself is kind of fascinating to me, because we have this original idea where the angel is the divine messenger of God, and further on it's kind of lost its meaning in the modern sense, where it's no longer a divine messenger of God, and we have kind of these different sects of angels now. Almost, we have like the guardian, the omen, the messenger, different perspectives on what an angel is and what it could be. And because of that appearance of Michael and Gabriel, we have this understanding now that angels are giant men with wings and white robes, and I find that kind of transition to be fascinating, how it's kind of carried on to portraying all images in that one angel, instead of being people or things, really, that could be wheels or emanations of any sort that are flaming with flaming swords and the whole be not afraid thing just comes off as rather comedic as times, because like just imagine your worst nightmare coming to you and just being like, be not afraid. It's honestly comedic to me.
A big part of that transition is to appeal to the masses, to make angels more appealing to people as time goes on. One thing that I've also noticed is that certain angel names for the choirs and stuff have specific meanings. Like the seraphim, they mean specifically to burn or uncertain, and the etymology used can also be traced back to serpent, which I just find really interesting. And there's a whole bunch of different things when looking into the etymology of each of the choirs, what they mean and what they look like. And I think that nowadays we've just kind of changed it so that they're all, like you said, men with wings. I think that really detracts from what an angel is.
Yeah, I think the personification of angels is a really strange thing to me, because angels are essentially soldiers. They're very much task-oriented and very, like, militant in a lot of ways, as they are kind of the soldiers of God. They're not really like loving beings in a lot of scriptures, and they're very much there to get stuff done. And based on I've talked to some people who are really into angel working. I've dabbled with it a bit, not a ton, based on a good percentage of people we've talked to with unverified personal gnosis on this stuff. They always tell me that they're surprised by how kind of harsh and upfront and kind of humorless angels tend to be, and how they're very much like business, disciplined. They're doing things for a specific reason, and that is what they're doing, and they're very much not that emotional and just in this kind of like rigid mindset. And they're very non-human in the way they behave and interact with you, because like when we talk about spirits that are very human-like ancestry and demons, honestly, and kind of almost even the Fae. Like when we talk about these very human-like entities who have very human emotions or whatever, you work with them in such a different way that the way that angel workings are set up, especially Enochian, because Enochian is one of those systems where it has to be very much a certain way. If you get something wrong, it can cause a lot of fallback. It's something you want to be very, very careful with. It just shows that these entities are really not human-like. So I think it's strange that they've become these human-like beings, though I really do think the point is to make a more mass appeal, or because that'd be like we associate holy things with sweet and nice things, I think. And as religion has become more love and light centric, I think Abrahamicism has moved away from this kind of draconian, stricter feeling that I think a lot of the scripture points to.
I kind of see that. I think that a lot of people misinterpret what, and at least the original meaning, misinterpret what an angel is. And they are, there's something called it's either called the ladder or the chain of beings or existence, and angels are often, seen as being directly under God, which makes sense. I don't see them necessarily as soldiers, but more so as like worker bees for a queen. And that kind of idea is something that I've become more and more familiar and comfortable with as I've done my own research. And I haven't done necessarily workings, but I have seen unverified personal gnosis where it does come out, like Georgina said, with a type of type of kind of humorless, very exact, very tasking thing, as opposed to a summoning a demon, or in I believe it's Solomonic demonology, and Aiden, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I've heard of workings where you almost, what it sounds like, invoke an angel to kind of be over the demon and go through that kind of chain of command where you have something that's tasking that's below you and something that's superior, and that kind of working relationship creates this dynamic that you have someone that's there for a purpose and someone that's there for your purpose, essentially.
Yeah, that's correct. There's certain workings that you do with angels where you call upon angels to help you with contacting a demon and protecting you and essentially making sure that the demon is working properly. There's also a similar thing with the intelligence and spirit of a planet, also called angel and demon of a planet. So that's also another thing that you can do. Overall, though, like, angels are both messengers and soldiers, in my opinion. And since the word angel literally comes from the word meaning messenger, they are always working for something, and they aren't their own individual, personalized little entity. They kind of always have something higher attached to them.
And I think the order when you do the chain of command, spiritual calling your manager thing, it just kind of reminds us that demons and angels aren't as far apart or separated as we think they are. I think people, especially in more New Age circles, get into this kind of like love and light being mentality, or this like kind of the more guardian angel interpretation. I think it really connects to this idea like that it's very separate from anything heavier or darker. But in reality, when you look at scripture, you realize that demons are in a large part fallen angels, and that there's not as much of a separation there, and that there really isn't this, like, there is that dichotomy, sure, but the dichotomy is more fluid than I think people think it is.
I would also like to mention that there are demons that are fallen, like that I could be wrong here. I'm open to being corrected about this. But there are demons who, like, in their descriptions are like they can't wait to get back to heaven, essentially. And they're a type of angel. I believe it's 1/3 is given to the army of Satan or something like that in Revelations. And that kind of shows you that, like, the two are inherently interconnected. If, like, an angel can become a demon, like let's just talk about the grand demon himself, Lucifer. So Lucifer is one of these prime examples that you can kind of see that is an angel, right, in original text, but is nowadays considered a demon. And even in demonic workings, he's recognized as such. He's not recognized as an angel, such as the, say Archangels, which are a whole different class of angels that seem to be separated from the rest. And I'm not too experienced on Archangels themselves, but from my understanding, there is a couple different numbers of angels and archangels. I believe in the Christian Holy Bible, it defines only the two of Michael and Gabriel, but I might be wrong on that one.
Yeah, like you mentioned, there's actually 3 archangels recognized in the Christian mythology, which is Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. When you look into Jewish mythology, there's dozens of angels, and they go through the different choirs as well. The different choirs is something that's really interesting to note, because a lot of people focus only on the archangels, and they really only focus on a few of them instead of the I believe there are 13 of them. But they really only focus on a few of them, like the 4 quarters or the 7 associated to the planets. But there are plenty of other angels out there, and I think it's really interesting how there's just this big focus on archangels, when there's things that are closer to God, like the seraphim or the cherubim.
I mean, I think the real reason they've become the focus and the real reason why the conceptions have changed would be the art and the religious art, because, way back when, the average person didn't have unlimited access to resources like we do now, or really getting it firsthand. And so looking at art and the visual depictions and paintings and whatnot was really a way that a lot of people kind of learned and interpreted things. And when you look through the artistic renditions, you see obviously like revisions from scripture, because you're trying to create a piece of art. And so the art tends to focus on the more, this is a little bit of theorizing here, but art is going to focus on the things that are more interesting to paint, to create art based off. And so the things that appear in the stories more are obviously going to have inspired more artists. And so when you look at these artworks, it's a lot more appealing to create something that's more human-like and personified, so the person looks at the image and feels a more emotional connection to it. And so as artistic traditions began, especially in the Christian tradition, because unlike the other Abrahamic faiths, for the majority of Christian art, it's very image-heavy. There's a lot of renditions of spirits and God, and it's very much like paintings of what happened. And so through the artistic tradition developing, we get this sense that angels are this very embodied human-like thing. And I think we're so used to those arts and the way that the Christian artistic tradition portrayed angels that it made an imprint on human consciousness. So, like, when you go to a church and you see these mosaics of these elaborate angel imagery of the archangels, you're going to think that's what angels are, because, let's be real, the average person is not going to want to read a ton of scripture and do a ton of deep divings themselves. So when they see that this is how it's depicted artistically in the Christian tradition, that's what they're going to grasp onto as their beliefs, and they're going to connect with.
This market appeal is also something that has brought us to where we are today, where angels are seen as these like kind of cute, fluffy beings that are always watching over us and protecting us and are really involved in daily life. I think that this kind of change in angels is a really interesting development from the kind of terrifying messengers and soldiers of God. And I think there's this big thing that's coming up now of this detachment from God of the angels, which is where we get into things like pagan angelology and angels as a deity.
I definitely want to touch on this more modern take of angels and like pagan theology, because as a practicing pagan myself, I understand the kind of want, and especially in the Western world, we have this very we're very comfortable with this idea of the modern angel, right? Something that is like a cherub or a man with wings, and you can see this portrayed in pagan ideology with Cupid, and that is one of the angels that I think of that can be like classified as angel, but in the mythology they aren't defined as anything other than a cherub, which, albeit a class of angel, is not really recognized as an angel per se. At least I don't believe so by the Greeks. In fact, I recall Cupid being slightly mischievous in nature, which shows that they aren't necessarily a messenger of a god or a soldier or a worker bee in a sense, but more so has a free will. And this idea of pagan angels, I want to guide away from deities here for a second and talk about more personal experiences. But I see a lot of pagan people who work with angels in the sense of their guardian angel or spirit guide, or some people might even argue that any embodiment of something that has wings can be counted as an angel, which I personally think is misguiding, and it's kind of doing the same thing that we mentioned in the Fae episode, where you have this label and then you just assign a collective to it. Like I was reading earlier today that some people might consider gnomes, fairies, elves, and dwarves angels, and fairies have wings like pixies and sylphs and stuff like that. But other than that, I struggle to conceptualize like a gnome as a fairy, as a folkloric thing, and then having a personal like a personal watcher is a big thing in Western society, right? We have this idea that it's a guide, and a lot of people refer to it as like your guardian angel. And this is an idea that's kind of all throughout, at least America, as far as I understand, that like, oh, your guardian angel is watching over you whenever they save you from something, or give you an omen or something like that leads you on a right path. And I think that's a fascinating idea for angels to uphold, because it does show that we are, affected by the influence of Abrahamic religions in Western society, but it doesn't really line up necessarily with what the modern neo-pagan or pagan reconstructionist would really go after.
Yeah, I think that the weird syncretism that we've been talking about, I was reading some blogs and websites earlier today and looking for what they were listing as pagan mythos related angels. You see of course cherub, like you see of course like Cupid and these kind of trickstery spirits, which I think the trickster archetype really contradicts the mythos of angels, but that's a whole thing. But then you see a lot of people are saying the Fae, which I find that a very bizarre take, because the Fae are very much tricksters and they really don't have any interest in serving anyone but themselves or serving humanity, when the angel implies submission to a higher force and working as a kind of soldier or messenger, but that implies you're messaging between things, implying a level of submission to another entity, which is why that doesn't really make sense. Then I saw Valkyries and Hindu divas, and I was like, that just feels like reaching. I think with paganism, a lot of people, I think, really want angels to be a thing in paganism, because angels are a very nice creature. They have very interesting mythology, and I think there's something that people want to extract from Abrahamic religion, because angels are kind of the nice side of Abrahamic religion, especially if you're kind of getting this influence from Christian artwork, which, as we discussed, like, is a huge influence on our understanding of what angels are, especially on a more folk level and a less scriptural level. So I think the reason behind all this interesting syncretism is because we like the idea of angels, and the idea of angels in a way, like you could see these kind of like messenger flapping wings entity in a pagan cosmology, and that makes sense. But the thing is, with the way that angels are written, it's really hard to fully extract them from an Abrahamic conception, because an angel has to be a soldier to something. So if it's not a soldier to the Abrahamic God, then it's like, what are angels' roles? And they become an entirely different entity altogether. And so at that point, you're talking about something completely different, which is a perfect segue into what you talked about, the guardian angel. Not the HGA that you see in Thelema or quite a few traditions, or is associated with the Abramelin and all that stuff, but the kind of light being angel, which really does come from Theosophy and Blavatsky, because, I mean, we can't deny that Theosophy is one of the heaviest influences on modern occultism, especially more New Age practices. You see this kind of like, because I think Theosophy was the first real philosophy that really tried to extract angels in this way and turn them into something separate and something different, with kind of having them as like associated with ascended masters and whatnot. But that, I think it just gets really murky, mythos-wise, and it becomes just a whole different beast, which is why I just think the word angel doesn't really make sense without having some god that angels are serving, because then they end up a whole different thing, and it changes their entire purpose, which at that point I would consider that a different class of spirits, right? Like that's a whole different thing.
I would like to raise a question for discussion. Regarding the concept of guardian angels, since we know that angels are kind of a messenger or servant, is the guardian angel assigned to you to serve you? If that question makes sense. I wanted to ask this question because, to me, a lot of what I see in the context of what a guardian angel is that they are something that either guides you or leads you. And that seems like kind of servish to me. And to further that question, like, do you think that if they are a servant to you, does that make you over them? Or if they're not a servant to you, do you think they're over you?
I would say that yes, they are in some degree subservient to humans. If I recall correctly from what I was taught in the church, is that angels are made to serve man and to serve God. However, I wouldn't say they are beneath us. Rather, they're making this active choice to be serving us. In a way, I've heard this thing described as a telos, which is basically a divine will. And angels need to have this divine will to serve humans. So in a way, our will needs to align with the angels' will for them to be properly serving us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's where it deviates from a concept like a familiar, which I think that is like the most overt servant that exists in folklore and mythos. But I think that whole idea of following the matching divine will is really just kind of getting into the HGA conception, where it's like the HGA guides you to find your true will and to achieve what you're meant to achieve in this lifetime. So I think the idea is really that they're a more detached thing than, say, a familiar, and they're more like guiding you to find what you are. So it's like they're serving you but still know more than you, kind of like a higher version of the self in a sense, but also detached. I think that kind of gets into opinion, but it's like this detached but guiding. I think guiding is a critical word, because they're serving you, but they're serving you in a more leadership way rather than like doing whatever you say.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Like, angels aren't going to do whatever you want. That's kind of what makes demons and angels somewhat separate. Like, demons aren't going to do whatever you want, but they are more willing to do things that align with more of our human needs, whereas an angel is more of our divine needs, if that makes any sense.
Georgia brought up the practice a couple of times now of the HGA, which I wanted to discuss a bit, and how it kind of differs from, or even the similarities of the kind of angel we see today. And I wanted to put out my understanding of the HGA in a historical context, because I know that in a couple of Plato's writings, it describes a daemon, which is essentially what an HGA is. Plato describes a daemon as something that every man has, and every man is guided by that daemon to access their will to to kind of realize their purpose, essentially.
Daemon HGA conception is really the thing that connects the Abrahamic ideas of angelology to the pagan ideas, because I think this idea of a spirit guide, HGA, whatever you want to call it, daemon, is a pretty... It's something that exists in a lot of cultures and theologies in various extractions and forms. And so I think that is really the thing that makes pagan-minded people interested in angels, but I think that kind of ignores that there's a big tradition of other spirits like daemons and regular spirit guides and whatnot serving this function, because I think the function of a mentorship type thing, or like an entity that leads you and guides you and shows you your divine will, is a very nice, like it's an idea that a lot of people want and a lot of people find extremely helpful. So I think that is what makes people outside of the Abrahamic understanding of religion so drawn to this concept, because I think that's something that is kind of a universal want, because when you're in occultism and you're in spirituality, a lot of the times it can feel really confusing and you don't really know what you want, and it's a lot of kind of figuring out what you're seeking out to begin with. I think a lot of people don't fully know what their goals are when they get into this, or they shift later on. And I think having that guide is something that everyone wants, that they can understand that, because when you mess with this stuff, it's something that's really hard to understand and really hard to extrapolate kind of a normal understanding out of. And so I think that this guide concept is just very universally appealing.
Let's get into the archetype of an angel, since that's more what we're familiar with in the modern world. We see angels as the divine messenger, like the Jacob's ladder image, where angels are coming up and down to earth and talking to us for God. Or they're also seen as a savior figure, like your guardian angel is there to protect you, save you in any sort of a bad accident, things like that. What do we think about this whole archetype that's kind of evolved now?
The whole idea of the angel really being just this no longer necessarily just this messenger or this this kind of guide anymore. It's just more so what I see in a lot of literature and art is that it's a representation of good. There in recent years we have animation, which often after someone dies in like cartoons, they will immediately become not a soul but an angel or a devil based on more so what their life was like a thing that I that kind of comes to mind is there is an episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom dies and he's sent to cat heaven and sent back down to beg forgiveness from Jerry or spend eternity in hell. And it's become less of kind of this idea of either this is a messenger or a thing of the divine, than kind of a representation of what is good and what is bad. And there are some events that kind of paint angels in the not so great light that's scattered throughout religious text. And I find it fascinating that we've kind of just made angels, just because they are traditionally servants or soldiers of God, messengers of God, that we've kind of just made them out to be good and then demons bad. And of course that comes with kind of the angelicization of the church and really moving towards this movement of demons versus angels in modern society, where demons are bad things that lead you down bad paths and they'll strip you of your will, where angels are guiding you to your true will and trying to lead you towards a idea that that God is there for you, or that you are connected to God. and separating the two into enemy camps.
I think that's one thing that's really interesting is this separation of angels and demons. When, if you look at it, they are the same being, just kind of different pathways, if you think about it like that. Like, demons are fallen angels for the most part, and several demons are mentioned to want to become angels again. So it really makes this whole thing, when you really look into it, it really makes this whole thing less good and evil and more of a morally gray. These are spirits, they're not good and evil, if that makes sense.
I think in the modern context, a lot of what happens is either influenced or watered down from the original source, to be quite honest. I think that there is a good amount of truth to the representations that we have today, but there's also kind of a misleading agenda that really tries to be a catch-all for one or the other. A big thing that I've kind of heard mentioned within not only the confines of this conversation, but conversations within others that was brought up briefly in the beginning, is that angels are not here to like humor you. And I wanted to repeat this point because it feels very off-putting for people to be like, oh, my angel did this or my angel did that, and kind of going into this conversation where, and of course I'm not trying to dismiss anyone's belief or anything like that, but going into this point where they're like your friend, and that's something that we also covered in the idea of deities as well. And there are people who I know who actively worship and pray directly to angels, which to me is kind of odd personally, because that's one of the things that's mentioned in text that is a no-no, is to not worship angels but worship the source of them. And it's nearly fascinating because we have this idea, right, especially in pagan culture, that your conception of something is its reality, which calls for a lot of disagreement later down the line, because when you meet someone who's well studied and well versed and someone who is not studied but feels validated in their unverified personal gnosis, and you have a disagreement, that kind of causes a very odd tension in the conversation, where it's like one of us thinks inferior of the other, and this kind of idea that you can nearly deify an angel and try to go with this concept that angels are like people who treat Hecate as like mommy, treating angels like their BFF. It's this odd dynamic, and I do see it a lot, and I understand that, like, thinking this person, or the not person but entity, such as in a guardian angel context, is looking out for you and wants the best for you, can be kind of seen as that way, but they're not, like I originally stated, they're not here to really humor you. And I feel like it's not so much as a guardian, but as a guiding angel. Yeah, there are things that they'll protect you from, and if you work with them or work with yourself or your HGA, that's kind of going towards finding your true self or your right path and stuff like that. But it's not like you're going to be holding pinkies on the playground.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying about deifying an angel, it just doesn't make any theological sense. if you look at the old grimoires, it's always calling upon the god name and then the angel, calling upon the highest power, then calling upon the next lower power, and so on and so forth. There's always a chain of command, and you can't just take one part of that and then deify it. You can't take, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but like, you can't take one part of it and make it the most important part of it, even though they're all significantly important to each other.
My final thoughts are that pay attention. I think as easy as it is to kind of look at art or literature or go with kind of like a pop culture or modern understanding of things, and it is legitimate to do that if that's your practice or that's what you're drawn to, I still think it's important to research and understand the source material and where things come from in their histories. It can be a little boring and annoying to do deep research, but if you're going to incorporate something into your practice, like that's become something that's a big part of your life and something that becomes very personal to you and serious. And so if you want to do these things, I think you should take it very seriously and give it the time and energy and resources it needs to truly deep dive and do as much research as possible to fully understand the history and the implications of what you're working with. And I think when you choose to work with something, you should think about your wider philosophy and your wider beliefs on the world and reality when deciding if it's something that's for you, because having a cohesive belief set is something that really helps a lot of people. And so just be kind of careful and read a lot and research and be prepared and kind of think heavily about what you're going to do.
Ultimately, how I would summarize my feelings on the topic is I think that there is a lot of interesting mythos that's attached to angels, even in Abrahamic knowledge. You know, we have I mentioned earlier kind of the Kabbalistic attachment to angels and the different Sephirot. And I think that is that's fascinating, and as well as the over 200 angels mentioned in Jewish text. I believe it's over 200. I think that there's a lot of origin source material that should be looked at, and I don't think that talking about angels in the modern context is necessarily bad, but I do think it would benefit a lot of people to kind of go down this rabbit hole of where angels came from and the different types of angels and the kind of what qualifies as an angel, and really take a step back into looking at where they are really comfortable, or where they would fall with the entire idea of angelolatry or angelology at all. And we've mentioned consistently throughout this conversation, I think that with that territory does come demonolatry and demonology, not necessarily something that you have to do or have to work with, but I think it would be a good complement to the study. As far as pagans and angels, I understand the mindset in the Western world and kind of not being able to really change that, but it ultimately isn't something that is a pagan construct. Although there might be representations of things that match the term angel, I think that a lot of people who I see use angel as a term to incorporate their practices should possibly consider moving more towards studying Abrahamicism, or more towards studying the reconstruction of the pagan myth that they're practicing. And I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that it's a bad thing, because there are several things that people as syncretists do, and honestly it is easier for us in the Western world to work with Abrahamic ideas because it's stuff that we can conceptualize and stuff that we're already familiar with. However, I think that understanding that there are arguments that can be brought up in conversation, and kind of going more towards a idea where you can defend your statements or come up with synonyms for your vocabulary of what you've already addressed. Like if you're saying that a certain deity is akin to being a guardian angel to you, you need to kind of have a background knowledge of where the terminology comes from, and if that is something that's inherently attached to you or something that is external, and go forward with the knowledge that there is a lot of influence of particularly Christianity in current pagan culture, and kind of assisting yourself in understanding.
Overall, just like working with any entity, working with angels is not something that should be taken lightly. Angels have a long history within Abrahamic mythos, and I think that should be researched before trying to go at and working with them. I think that angels should be respected for what they are, and they shouldn't be tried to change. They shouldn't be tried to change too much into something completely new and different. While I think that pagans should be able to research angels, I don't think that they should be taken out of their original context.
This has been Georgina.
And I've been Aiden.
This is Chandler.
And you've been listening to Occultism with a Side of Salt.